Messi. Messi. Oh, my goodness. Balotelli. Aguero. Oh, that is extraordinary. What a head, son. What a head. Back of the net.
Hello, and welcome to the Not a Pundit podcast. This is a very, very, very special episode because, Conor, we have somebody that, for the first of the podcast, is Coach of the Year. And our congratulations goes to one Mr. Johnathan McKinstry. Johnathan, how are you?
No, thank you very much, Killian. Yes, obviously just yesterday, that was a nice sort of cherry on the cake in terms of my time in Kenya, for them to sort of acknowledge it with the Coach of the Year award. But yeah, in general, very well, thank you. Good to join you guys, and yeah, looking to get into it.
Yeah, and congratulations on the new job, because when I first messaged you, you were just leading Gor Mahia, if that's I'm pronouncing it right, to the Kenyan Championship, which you did very, very successfully. And then you were made international coach of the Gambia, but we will come back to that later on. I do want to start by saying I'm a Sunderland fan. So your beginnings kind of, they're not for me, but Conor here is a Newcastle fan, and you came through the elite development there. How did that come about?
Yeah, so, Connor and me have that in common. I actually grew up, I was the only person in black and white in Northern Ireland growing up. Everyone else was in Liverpool or Man United or Rangers or Celtic growing up. Whereas for me, there's a family connection there. My aunt married into a family where one of the brothers played for Newcastle United in the 80s.
Oh, very cool.
I don't know what you would term that officially. A half uncle, a quarter uncle, I don't know, an uncle-in-law.
A black and white uncle.
Yeah, exactly. So he played for Newcastle in the 1980s, and then he actually got injured quite early. He was Newcastle's youngest ever goal scorer at the time, got injured quite early, and then came back to be physiotherapist of the first team under the Kevin Keegan era.
Oh, wow.
And continued for the next sort of 15 years under numerous managers. So, growing up as sort of a kid in the 90s in Northern Ireland, I think it was partly the fact that he'd been there and was there, but also then, just this football Newcastle United were playing in the 90s. So, yeah, I grew up black and white, and then going over to university at Northumbria University to study sports science. Part of the reason was to be close to Newcastle United. I had other options to go to Stirling University, to go to Heriot Watt. I think Loughborough was an option as well, but Northumbria had a really strong sports program. So that was the primary consideration. But beyond that, the idea that you could be living in the city and going and watching Newcastle on a semi-regular basis was a big pull. And then, once I was in the city, it was like, okay, I want to be coaching. I need to have a part-time job, putting myself through university. I'd already done some of my coaching badges. And so really, just being in contact with sort of the football in the community, the advanced development centers there at Newcastle United. And yeah, for me, it was a great, to have that badge on at 19, 20, 21 years of age, going out into the community, working with sort of the young players. So yeah, it was a nice sort of introduction to football, and it working for the club that I'd grown up sort of quite fanatical about as a child. And I generally was fanatical. I remember running around the house when, the likes of Rob Lee or Warren Barton or, Paul Kitson would score a goal, and my mother sort of looking at me as though something was wrong with me. But
I didn't getting the free swag every season to walk around and get paid to wear.
Well, that was it. I think, for all of us involved in football, I think we're very sort of privileged that we get paid to work in this game at all. But yeah, as a young man, just out of high school, to be getting paid, a reasonable level of money to, put myself for university and to wear the badge of the club that I grew up supporting. Yeah, it was a very nice thing to be able to do at that stage.
Did you go straight into the youth kind of academy side of things, or did you start out Newcastle Foundation, or what was the story there?
It was the foundation primarily. At the time, I had obviously just done my B license, and yeah, it was more working around, with the schools, with the after school clubs, and that sort of led into working. There's sort of a stage between that and the academy, which is like at the time was called like the advanced development centers, where those young guys in the community who we thought had some level of promise, potential, were sort of brought into this, bring the good ones together and see whose head rises above the rest. So yeah, it was that over a couple of years at university, which was, yeah, it was good, working with all levels of players. And yeah, it was a good grounding. I always say, I think at university I was coaching more hours a week than I was actually in class. That wasn't, I was turning up for my lectures, but it was just, the modern day universities, it's 10 or 12 hours of in contact time. And
Yeah.
I think I was coaching between Newcastle, I was coaching the university men's team as well. I was coaching an under 15s team in Gateshead. I think I was doing sort of 14 or 15 hours of coaching a week, and then also almost supplementing that with my degree. So
probably learning more from being on the pitch than being in the lecture halls, to be honest.
I think it was a balance. In essence, I've always believed that you need the practical, but at the same time, good ideas need theory, need reason behind them. And so, but at the same time, my struggle with university, or my query was always, this is all grand in theory, but how does it help me make a better footballer? How does it help me make someone score more goals? How does it help me get someone to run faster with the ball at their feet? And sometimes, and look, I'm going back 20 years, sports science degrees have probably changed quite a lot now, but I remember at the time thinking, this is all great in a laboratory setting, but how does it really apply in the big bad world out there? So I think having that balance was very important.
No, it's interesting you say that. A good buddy of mine actually did sports science in Newcastle and was kind of coaching with the foundation as well, and he kind of had the same qualms with the kind of education side of it. Of the theory was great, but like you said, it was, it's not teaching you how to nurture players. But I think if we go on any further about Newcastle, Killian will probably explode.
I will have to say one good story I've got to tell Killian. The first time I ever encountered a Sunderland supporter was in Belfast the day after the Charlton playoff final. And I thought, first of thing, I thought fair play for wearing that shirt the day after that playoff final. But I did probably laugh out loud to the point that he could hear me on the other side of the street. I was quite young at the time, but that was a long time ago. You've maybe got over that penalty, Miss Killian, by now.
Just about like that's what we call a repressed memory. We don't like to bring it up
deep in the filing cabinet, yeah.
But like for anybody that has kind of like Googled your name and kind of seen your Wikipedia, like globetrotting kind of seems to like might be a word that comes to mind. And you kind of started that early enough. So you went from Newcastle to New York, and from New York to that's where you kind of made your introduction to Africa with the Right to Dream Foundation. How was New York? Because that was around the time that they had just become Red Bulls, was it? Or were they still Metro Stars?
Yeah, no, I landed in New York just after, maybe, I want to say it's 6 months, maybe 12 months after the Red Bull had bought the club. And like, it was wonderful. It was fantastic. I think I owe a lot of my career to those sort of 2.5 years in New York. Everyone sort of knows the Red Bull sort of model around the world for producing talent, young players. The amount of players who've come through Leipzig, Salzburg, New York. There was the academy in Brazil. There was one in Ghana for a period of time. And the amount of players who've come through that. But I also think if you actually look at a lot of coaches who work around the world who've come through Red Bull, like I can name, I know 4 or 5 guys who I personally worked with who work in the English Premier League and Championship as sort of assistant coaches, goalkeeping coaches, etc. Obviously, the amount of head coaches who've come through that system, the likes of, Hasenhüttl, etc. Red Bull was this real talent factory for coaches. And so for me to go to New York, and I don't know what came first. It's sort of a chicken and egg scenario, because for me, the way Red Bull play in terms of that sort of that aggressive, that going toe to toe with people, that quite vertical approach to the game. And it's a game model that's spread out. You could call Borussia Dortmund, Liverpool, Leeds United, all of these teams play, Southampton play a version of that Red Bull DNA now, which all obviously started Gerard Houllier was sort of the director of football at the time when
You
I
forget
went
that
to Red
actually,
Bull.
yeah.
Yeah, so Gerard Houllier was Red Bull's director of football before, Ralph Raniak and stuff got involved. So he was really the sort of, the starting point of that. And so I don't know, was it because of Red Bull I think like that, or did I think like that and therefore I fitted in really well in the Red Bull ecosystem?
Yeah.
Probably a little bit of both, really. But I also think the high standards at a club like Red Bull, they have impeccably high standards. Even I was working with the best young players from sort of 10 to 15 years of age. And I was very fortunate to be working in that academy setting. But even for the guys who are out working in the community with the local community football clubs under the Red Bull banner, the standards that the club expected of everyone who put on that jersey, on and off the field, in terms of reputational, importance, was so high. And so for me, I was given my autonomy to go and coach, which I always wanted. Yes, we had a framework within Red Bull, but you were then said, right, stay within this framework, but go and coach. You put your sort of spin onto it. And so I think that was so important for me. And look, when I was in New York, I was coaching like 20 hours a week, which at the age of 21, 22 is so important to get that practical experience on the grass every day. So yeah, it was a really important time for us, and yeah, just really pleased about being there and really thankful for it.
How
Yeah.
did you find the kind of introduction to, because that around that time was kind of the re-kickoff of the MLS and football in America. Like there was the original NASL, then the MLS came through, and it was kind of a barren land for a while, other than Carlos Vladiarama, and then kind of around the time that Josie Altidore came through, there seemed to be kind of a emergence where Americans kind of going, oh wow, we have some players that are coming from our own leagues, because Clint Dempsey had already gone, Casey Kelleher was already in the UK. And how did you find the kind of the reception of being in New York and working with a club just as they had this fresh,
Approach.
not just ownership, but kind of a fresh interest in the league?
Yeah, well, actually, as I landed in New York was at the same time a certain Mr. Beckham was landing in LA. And so actually, I think it was within the first couple of weeks of me being in New York, it was the first I don't know whether it was Beckham's debut or whether it was a second game, but Red Bull played LA Galaxy at Giant Stadium, and there was like 80,000 people in the stadium to see David Beckham. And so, yeah, obviously the league sort of kicked off, 97, 98. It was a couple of years after the World Cup, or no, 95 or 96. It was a year or two after the World Cup, the league kicked off. And so by what time would that have been? Around 2007. It's sort of been going for a decade. But now there was a huge investment going on in the league. Like even at Red Bull, we had Yuri Djorkaeff was in our team, Juan Pablo Angel was in our
Wow.
team, Claudio Reina was in our team. Obviously, as I left 2 years later, they signed Thierry Henry to replace me. But there was now this. They were starting to invest to bring the mega stars into MLS, which probably really hadn't happened in the first decade of it, really. And so there was big investment into it. And so the interest was growing. The interest in soccer in the United States has always sort of been exponential. It's so huge. It's just then, how do we I do think soccer in the US has sort of almost like a buffer at that college age.
Mm-hmm.
Where at 18, 19, kids go from playing, every day or whatever in an academy setup, and then you go to a college system where you're playing 2 games a week, your season only lasts for 3 months, and you're going to do that for, a few years, and then you're expected to come back into professional soccer. So there's definitely this buffer that is causing challenges in the United States, and that was there then. I think it's still there today. But it was a great time to be there. And look, when you were working with that Red Bull badge on, and you were working with the top young kids, I always say in the United States, the respect a coach is given is 5 star. It's right up there. If you say to someone in the UK or Ireland that you're a youth soccer coach, they'd be like, "Oh, that's nice." Whereas in the United States, being a youth soccer coach really elevates you. You're really respected. The role of coach, that term coach, is really respected in the United States in a way that I'm not sure it is back in the UK and Ireland.
And do you
And
think that's a
so
fallout of American football coaches, or like is in because obviously the football programs and the basketball programs lead sports over there for the most part from a collegiate level. So do you think it's a fallout of that, or just a general difference of respect for coaches?
I think it's on a couple of levels. I think ultimately sport is seen as such an important facet of youth sort of development in the United States because of the college scholarship opportunities. College costs so much money. So if your kid, male or female, can show talent in a discipline away from the classroom or in addition to the classroom, whether that's sports, music, etc., then the opportunity to get some of your college paid for, all of your college paid for, is significant. And so it's like if a family can find a good club, a good coach, then they really want their son or daughter to really just go with that because of what it can save you down the line. It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I also think in the United States there is such, I don't know, this might sound wrong, but there's such an obvious put the child first mentality in the United States.
Yeah.
It's so, children are the center of everything. And I'm not saying that's not the case in Ireland or the UK.
It's different,
but
though.
It's so blatantly obvious in the United States. And so, yeah, I just think when you're then involved in that cross section of looking after sort of the children and young people in your care, and then also being a support structure to help them through that academic journey into college, I just think, yeah, you're seen as such an important cog in the process of developing that young person.
Obviously, for like most coaches, it starts out in a youth system, and some coaches go straight to men's senior team or women's senior team. But do you find, or have you found that working across kind of youth setups or with younger players, that it's kind of informed you as a coach, kind of with the senior team? Because if you kind of been able to nurture the younger players, it's to me would be easier with the senior players then.
Yeah, 100%, Connor. For me, I'm very privileged. I've coached at every level of the game. When I was 16, 17, starting doing like my mini soccer leaders award of the Irish FA, I was coaching the 6 and 7-year-olds on a Sunday morning down at the local rugby club in Lisburn. Coaching them football, I should say. But it might not have looked like football, some of the technique, but it was, I assure you. And I coached from that, obviously the schools program in Ireland and Newcastle, through academy setups, through to running my own academy in West Africa, into, coaching the university players at Northumbria, coaching club, coaching international. And I'm very fortunate to have worked at all levels of the game. And I do think that informs me. I think you learn how to coaching youth players. I know there's especially former pros who go directly from playing to coaching senior players. And look, they've got this big sort of encyclopedia of coaching sessions and knowledge that's hidden away in their brain. But have they learned how to coach? Have they learned how to transmit that knowledge? And that's what I always say to any coaches getting involved or having ambitions in the game, is for them, go and coach everybody. Coach the 6-year-olds, coach the 20-year-olds, coach the boys, coach the girls. When I was younger, it's probably expired by now, but I did a qualification in coaching players with disabilities. So even when I was young, when I was at university and with the Irish FA before I went to university, I used to go and do some of the disability football coaching as well. And it's all communication. It's all about how do you communicate an idea to somebody else. That's at the base of it. And so, all those years, all those hours coaching all different abilities in all different types of environments, pitches, weathers, what do you do? You've got your session plan sorted. What do you do when it starts pouring with rain? It's like, well,
Yeah.
okay, maybe today we're going to do something different, have something ready to do. So yeah, I think having coached at all levels of the game really has developed me that I can sort of roll with the punches, if you know what I mean. Whatever's thrown at me in a coaching environment, somebody's injured. We don't have a certain amount of players. The facility we have is not what we expected it to be. We don't have portable goals. Whatever it happens to be, I think I'm quite adept at sort of going, okay, give me a minute, let me think about it. Okay, this is what we're going to do instead.
Now, in fairness, that is perfectly proven by your first kind of men's full-on role with Sierra Leone. Like, you were, what, 27 going in? Which, that in itself, you were probably coaching players that were older than you. But then also, there was the outbreak of Ebola. And through all of that, you got Sierra Leone to their highest world ranking that they'd ever been to. And you got them to the African Cup of Nations, despite the fact that every other nation in the tournament didn't want you there. One, how did you end up with the job? And two, how did you handle taking on that kind of role, jumping up from academy and the developmental end of things?
Yeah, like I think we also have to appreciate in life some things are about right time, right place. You need to be ready to take an opportunity, which I always tell people. I was like, don't wait for the opportunity, be ready for it, because if you wait for it, you don't have 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days to prepare for it. You got to go now. You got to be ready to race as soon as the light goes green. And so for me, that was Sierra Leone was really an opportunity that was right time, right place. I was obviously running the academy in Sierra Leone. I'd been there, I think, 3 years at the time. We were the only sort of full-time residential football academy. We had the best young players in the country living with us, working with us every day. A number of them were in the youth national teams. I was an A licensed coach at the time, and I was living in the country full-time. And the Swedish coach, I believe, basically he quit. He resigned, and there was, I think, 3 World Cup qualifiers remaining, and Sierra Leone had a feather's width chance to qualify. It really wasn't a huge chance at all to qualify anymore with 3 games to go, and it became obvious just sort of in local football circles that they were going to go for, let's say, a lower budget option. They were going to say, right, let's give it to someone who's coaching in the Sierra Leone Premier League, because then we just have to pay a salary. We don't have to pay flights, hotels, visas. You don't have to pay for all of that. And as soon as I became aware of that, I just thought, right, let's make a few phone calls. Let's set up a meeting, because I just felt, even though I was only 27 at the time, I felt I was the best coach currently boots on the ground in Sierra Leone. And I'd watched a lot of the national team, obviously with the academy, we'd always have even the away games on the TV at when they were playing. And so I sort of knew the players. I knew who they were. I knew what I felt their strengths and weaknesses were. And if I'm honest with you, Killian, even before that, I believed I would get the opportunity to become the Sierra Leone national team coach at some point. I remember doing a class about goal setting with our players at the academy one day in the school. And I sort of mapped out my next 20 years. And I said to them, look, I don't know the meandering road that's going to be between each of these, but I said, look, here I am as sort of the academy lead at the academy. I think at some point I'll get the opportunity to coach the national team if I stay here for a while. It came earlier than I expected. I went into that meeting. I presented, look, next game's against Tunisia. This is how we can beat them. At home, they'd never beaten Tunisia in their history. And this is what I think we can do with the national team. And yeah, for them, I think it was a low risk option because there was only 3 games remaining. I was in the country. They were cutting their costs. And for them, also probably they looked at it and thought this might give us a bit of a media bump. If we appoint a 27-year-old, it's going to make the news.
Well, on that, I think we should say that when you took that job, you were the youngest head coach of a national team in world football. That's not nothing.
Yeah, so it definitely made the news. But I also have to understand that, and I think people have to acknowledge that had I been sat in Dublin applying for that job, there's no way they were appointing me. I was in a different race. I always say to players, even now when I'm picking a team, don't look at the appearances the right winger has if you're the left back. Don't be saying to me, oh, but the right winger's only playing 10 games a season and I'm playing 40 games a season. I'm like, but you're not in the same race as him. He's in a race with the other wingers. You're in a race with the other left backs. And so for me, I put myself in a race of people based in Sierra Leone, not people all over the world. And so in that race, I was the only A licensed coach. I hate to say it, some African nations do have a preference for a foreign coach.
Interesting.
And so I was in essence giving them that option of a foreign coach, foreign UEFA qualified rather than CAF qualified. And so I narrowed the field, and they decided I was the best choice from a field they wanted to select from. So very grateful for that opportunity. And look, but like I said, that was the first thing, getting the job was the first thing. But then it was, as you've said, Killian, a large proportion of the squad were older than me. That Sierra Leone squad was quite a mature squad. We had several players in their 30s, a number of players in their late 20s. And so I would say probably 60% of the players were either my age or older than me when we walked out onto the training pitch that first day. So yeah, that was, and then it comes down to you're ready to coach, and all of those years coaching the young players, coaching all different levels. I just said to my staff, we just go out and do what we do. And if it's good enough, it's good enough. If it's not good enough, the players will soon let us know by their reactions, and we'll know a little bit of information. But what else can we do? We can't do anything else. So let's just go and do what we do.
Being around the same age as the players, like, as Killian's saying, is it terrifying? Are they kind of half expecting you to be a friend because you're the same age as them? Because we see the likes of Nagelsmann, who's I think 34, and you wonder, how does that operate as the manager? Like, do they try play on you as a friend as opposed to the manager?
Look, I think this is true of all age categories. I think it for the media and for the people on the outside, it becomes more of an assumption when you're a similar age to players. But the idea of being sort of, what do they call it in sports degrees? They used to call it being a significant other. You're a significant other in the process. So I'm not above you. I'm not below you. I'm beside you, helping you achieve this goal that we're marching towards. And so for me, that's the way I've always seen sport. Now I'm almost 40 and I'm dealing with, 21-year-olds, 19-year-olds. And I don't think I do it any differently now. I probably have a few more tools in my sort of toolkit to do it than I did 20 years ago or 15 years ago. But I still think I approach it as being, look, I'm here to help you be the best version of you. And so that was sort of the same way when we went in with Sierra Leone. It was, I can't remember exactly what we said in the opening meeting, but I think it was something along those lines. It's like, look, guys, I'm here to give you a roadmap, and together we're going to try and get somewhere. We're going to try and get to our goals, because you want to be successful for your country. You want to be successful for yourself, for your family. We've got an idea, and we're going to work together on it. Now, I do think players will probably test you a little bit more if you are the same age or younger than they are. But again, for me, you got to remember, this wasn't my first time in a management role. I'd been running my football academy for a number of years. I'd been, even though I was only like 22, 21, 22 at Red Bull, I was one of the coaches helping develop the curriculum at Red Bull. So I'd been somewhat of a senior coach at Red Bull, even when there was other coaches who were maybe 10, 20 years older than me. So it wasn't my first time in a management or leadership position. And so even though I was very comfortable at being in that significant other category of supporting an athlete to be better, I also knew where my boundaries were, where those lines were. And I'm not someone to shout and roar at people, because I don't need to. When you're the coach, you just drop them. You just set them aside. I remember reading once, the coach's most powerful tool in terms of implementing his authority is the bench. That is authority. And it's very true. And so I think that was like a basketball coach said that. I think it was one of the American basketball coaches I read that from. It's like your most powerful authoritative tool as a coach is the bench. And so that's it. It's my decision. I don't need to shout and roar at you. I've always been of the belief that you're here because you want to be here. This is not a prison. You're not handcuffed to the team bus. If you don't want to be here, then don't be here. If you want to be here, let's work on it. Let's get there together. So yeah, I there was butterflies in the stomach before that first training session. There's no doubt about that. But we just ultimately went out and did what we did, and it worked, and the players responded well to it. And some of them pushed back a little bit on one or two of the things we wanted to do, but we didn't turn around and say, oh no, we're doing it because I say so. We say, well, come and stand in front of the tactics board and you tell us your questions and we'll walk you through why we want to do it our way. And so after those type of conversations, regardless of whether the player agreed with you or not, what they were clear about is that you knew why you wanted to do it. And so if they see that confidence and that theoretical underpinning to why you're going that direction, then they give you the chance. They say, okay, let's go that direction, because you're not just picking it out of the sky.
I think that's transferable to anything, I think both in a business perspective, I think that's just leadership, really,
It's a little bit of a Brian Clough. You can disagree with me and I can disagree with you, and in the end we'll all agree that I was correct.
you say it's very funny you say that, Killian. So I've got a few interesting things on my wall behind where you are at the minute, behind my computer screen, and one of them's actually I wrote to him when I was very young. So I've got a signed photograph from Brian Clough on the wall that says "Best wishes, Jonathan, Brian Clough."
Fantastic!
So it's the one thing I've sort of got up on the wall.
That's very cool.
Sense behind me, yeah. So Brian Clough was definitely someone who I, had a great affinity for and admiration growing up.
Well, I have to say, Brian Clough, everyone would call a risk taker, and I think it's fair to say that you're in that category too. Like, I mean, what possessed you to set up an academy in West Africa? Coming from Northern Ireland, like that's a bit of a hop, skip, and a jump,
Yeah, look, it was just, for me, I was offered the opportunity. Obviously I'd had that connection with the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana. They were employed or brought on board as the consultants to set up the foundation, the Craig Bellamy Foundation in Sierra Leone. And they approached me about would I be interested, initially being like the technical lead in charge of like the football side of it. That eventually evolved over the years to having a more wide-ranging sort of authority position. But it started with purely the football. And for me, there was sort of two things that influenced that decision. Number one was I always knew I wanted to go to the pro game. The reason I'd left the UK was, at the time, there was no real evidence of an academy coach making the jump to senior professional football in England or Scotland. There was lots of evidence of it in Germany and in Spain, but not really in the UK. And so for me, I thought, right, I've got to go away, prove myself, elevate myself to the professional game, and then maybe I can come back into that top 5 league context in 20 years' time. I don't know. And so that was part of the reason for going to the United States. And so when the opportunity came to go to West Africa, even though I was really happy in the position in the United States and really supported in the role at Red Bull, I just always think, and even to this day, you can achieve great success in the United States and the European game will look at it and go, yeah, but it's the United States.
Yeah.
I think that's the way it is, rightly or wrongly. Whereas I looked at it, I thought, if I can go to West Africa and if I can develop players who move to the Premier League, who move to France, to Spain, my name in some way will be attached to that development process. And that will elevate me to get these opportunities I seek in the medium to long term. So that was the first thing. I just thought the spotlight on the African game was greater than the spotlight on the American game. And then the next part to it was I was in Red Bull. Okay, I was involved in helping to create the curriculum, etc. But I wasn't the lead. Whereas in Sierra Leone, it was a blank canvas. It was a brand new academy. And I was going to be able to take whatever was in my head and distribute it to these players and see if my idea about football development and my idea about the game worked. That was, and so it was a risk. It was like, maybe I'll go here and it'll be a disaster. And
But you
then
learn.
what I'll know is that, okay, maybe I need to adjust my thinking on the game. Maybe what I think isn't the right way to do this. But equally, it was one of those, it was a litmus test. Is it right or is it not? And so, or not, is it right or not, but does it work or not? And so that was it. It was a bigger spotlight, and it was a test of what I believed about the game. And both of those things, I just thought, yep, that's enough reason to trade up a Manhattan skyline for a fishing village in West Africa. So, yeah.
As Killian mentioned, like, and if you don't want to touch on this topic, absolutely no problem. You were there during the Ebola crisis, which obviously was world news and incredibly sad. What was that like to even aside from football, just to be in the country at that point?
Yeah, it was incredibly challenging. We saw it from two different angles, because obviously we're still running the football academy at the time, and then also with the national team. And so, like, the country just, like, everyone experienced what a lockdown was like in the last few years in terms of the COVID pandemic. But I'd sort of, and my staff and the kids, because what we did was we'd heard quite early on from our sort of staff in the regions that something was happening before it became world news, before it even became Freetown news. We were aware because we had players, families from the border regions in Sierra Leone. So we had become aware that something was happening, that there was some sort of virus, that was affecting people quite badly. No one knew that it was Ebola at the time, but we became aware that something potentially serious was happening. As we understood that it was Ebola, we actually invited all of the academy families to come to the academy, and we gave them a workshop on how to sort of stay safe. We gave them supplies like soaps, like saline solutions, like all of these things that would help them wash their hands. And just because the thing about Ebola is, to avoid Ebola is pretty straightforward. If you do the right things, you're going to avoid it. But if you don't avoid it, it's devastating. And so we did that with the academy families. And what we then asked them, we said, look, everyone else is closing down. If you want, you can go home with your kids. However, if you would like, we are willing to keep the academy open. And what we'll do is we'll lock the gates. And only myself and the driver will go out every 2 weeks to get supplies in a safe way. And we'll come back, but no one, and we asked our staff the same, who is happy to stay here on site, live on site. We had accommodation, and understand that you're not able to leave, because the moment you leave, you're not allowed to come back, because we can't control the bubble. And yeah, we ended up, everyone stayed, all the kids stayed. We operated with a skeleton staff for, it must have been 6 or 7 months. Where we just locked the gates. And, we went on to a reduced curriculum. The kids were still going to school every day. We were still training every day, playing in internal matches. I got remarkably good at table tennis. I think my best run was I think I had 21 victories in a row, game after game after game, one weekend with the academy kids. And, we had the projector to show them the football and stuff at the weekends. And yeah, it was 6 or 7 months of a real lockdown.
Yeah.
And and it was, I still remember even at the time, people, I remember like certain news outlets wanted to come and do stuff, and we just said no. We were like, this isn't what this is about. It's the families have asked us to look after their kids. At the very outset, when they agreed to come to the academy as a scholarship, we said, we're going to look after your kids. And this, we just felt, was an extension of that. So that was one side of it. Then with the international team, the Sierra Leone national team, it was another side of it, because we weren't allowed to play home games. No one would travel to Sierra Leone. When we went to away games, we were subjected to quite stringent testing, which included the Ivorian government or medical wing deciding that 4 a.m. in the morning was the right time to do temperature checks.
Well, that's sound.
Hotel, so and whether that was all authentic or gamesmanship
I think
to
that's a
help
bit of
them win.
shithousery, all right. Yeah.
But we went through that, and it was an experience. And so yeah, it then meant, when the COVID pandemic happened, both myself and anyone who was involved in Sierra Leone at that time sort of already knew the score, knew how to the processes, at least in some ways, that we'd have to go through during the pandemic. So yeah, but Ebola was really tough. It was a devastating time, and it's odd to think back to that time. I still remember me and our driver, Mr. Kamara, going into the city to get like food supplies for the academy one weekend or one week. And you're going past and you're seeing, like the medical vans with people in the full hazmat
Oh
suits,
wow.
going the opposite direction and stuff. Or you'll see a crowd of people gathered around someone who's maybe collapsed in the street, and the people with hazmat suits coming to sort of get the body. So it was quite, yeah, it's hard to even describe. I don't know the word for it, but it was sort of, it made you assess the important things in life,
I can
definitely.
imagine.
Yeah.
And so, not a nice thing to have lived through, but also I think something that you learn a huge amount from. And you don't go through those type of experiences without learning something just about everyday life and about the importance of certain things.
Well, it's a definition of siege mentality in football's thrown around a lot, but that really is the definition of it. And hats off to you, not even blowing smoke, to be able to carry a staff and a group of players through something like that is nothing short of incredible.
No, thank you.
And with Sierra Leone, obviously you had great success on the pitch as well, guiding them to the highest world ranking. But it's not the only nation in Africa you've done that for as well. I believe you did it with Rwanda. Then after brought them to one, if not their highest, one of their highest, and got them competitive on the some of the continental tournaments. I'm not sure if it was AFCON or it was another one in
It was the
2015.
African Championship of Nations, so we got to the quarterfinals. So that's, people might not be aware listening. Africa CAF have two competitions. So they've got the African Cup of Nations, which everyone sees most of the time. They also have a competition called the African Championship of Nations, which is it's like retro AFCON because it's players who are based in their country. So if you want to play for Rwanda at the African Championship of Nations, then you got to be playing in Rwanda.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so you have to be Rwandan, but you've also got to be playing in the domestic league. And so when I say retro AFCON, it's a bit like, because if you go back to the AFCONs of the 1950s and 60s, there wouldn't have been players playing in Europe. Whereas now, AFCON, pretty much every player is playing in Europe, Asia, or the Americas. So CHAN, as it's called, the African Championship of Nations, is really like when you step foot in the countries, it's played in the big stadiums. The stadiums are full to capacity, but there's almost more of a connection because the supporters, these are the players that the supporters see every week for the domestic club they support. And so there's a real just connection to it. And yeah, so with Rwanda, we got to the quarterfinals of the African Championship of Nations. With Uganda, we qualified for it as well and did well in the AFCON as well. So yeah, I think post Sierra Leone was a bit more about the world rankings. With Rwanda and Uganda, it was more sort of tournament results, which I think ultimately is the thing you want to go on. It's nice to do well in world rankings, but at the same time, the prizes in football are about how you progress in tournaments. Belgium would happily swap their whatever it was 3 or 4 year stint as number one in the world ranking for a European Championship or a World Cup. So yeah, world rankings nice, and definitely for Sierra Leone it was a step in the right direction. But for Uganda and for Rwanda, and ultimately now the charge with the Gambia, is about tournament progression and tournament success.
And like, obviously, when you were starting out, it was going from academy into international football, but then you did go back into club football in the top job. So I believe it was Lithuania first, and then in Bangladesh, and then in Kenya. How did you find the change of the countries? Because that alone is fascinating. But two, kind of going from seeing these players maybe once every 3 months to dealing with them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think firstly in terms of the countries, I've always been. I think it's one of my biggest strengths is my adaptability. And I don't know whether it's coming from back home in Ireland. We tend to, there's not just one or two of us have been very adaptable over the years and traveling the world. It's almost like a national trait that we can go and we can settle. We can settle pretty much anywhere quite affably and quite, in a straightforward way. And so I think my adaptability to go into those roles and just embrace the culture. I've always been one. I'm a very curious person in the sense that I like to find things out. And so, I like asking questions. I like understanding why things are done in a certain way. And so culturally, I'm really interested in new places. But ultimately, you always had this stable thing at the center of that, which was the football. Because football is the same all over the world. Okay, there might be slightly different tactical or physical traits in different
But it's
parts
a universal language.
But once you step foot over those white lines, a football pitch is the same size, whether it's in Bangladesh, Nepal, Brazil. The goalposts are in the same position. You know what I mean? The rules are the same. And ultimately football is the same and the dressing room is the same. You will see the same characters. There will be the joker. There will be the quiet one. There'll be the guy who's got too much to say. There'll be the practical joker. There'll be the person who's not quite as good as he thinks he is and always wants to tell you how good he is rather than show you it. So every dressing room, whether it was back at Northumbria University, whether it was in New York, Sierra Leone, right now to the Gambia, the dressing rooms have the same characters, usually in the same percentage makeup. You can guarantee 60% of them will be like this, 10% will be like that, etc. And so that is always the North Star. It's always that thing that is there. You can rely on it to be the same. And so in that sense, whenever maybe you weren't quite sure of what to do in the other parts of a new country, just always rely on the football. The football will keep you right and keep you on solid ground. So, for me, that was really important. In terms of going into club coaching, it's definitely a change of pace. They're very different jobs. I think people would see, the job of a national team coach and the job of a club coach is, they're the head coach, the manager. It must be the same. But I think maybe Gareth Southgate has shown this with the England team over the years, how much the national team coach can be quite an ambassadorial role, quite a figurehead, not just for football, but for general society. If
politician almost.
Yeah. And so, and that's like it's an ambassador. So for me, you're representing the nation. It's almost like being, the foreign affairs sort of person, because you're going out representing this nation in all of these different countries around the world, and you're setting the criteria under which your players will also represent that nation and the standards. So I think international football off the pitch, there's so much to be done there. Obviously, you only see your players every few weeks, every few months, but also that has upsides to it because see when you, for example, our next games for the Gambia are Comoros and Tunisia. We will know everything about every player who's going to play in that game down to the finest detail. Why? Because we've got 2 months to prepare.
Yeah.
So we will know everything that we need to know. And then it's just about creating a game plan and a strategy and doing well on the day to implement and to do what we need to do. Whereas in club football, now we've got all the time in the world to work with the players on the grass. You're with them every day. You build those relationships up person to person. You can do an extra 20 minutes here or there if you want. If the session's not going well, you can say, hey, do you know what? Let's cut it today, get in the shower, go home, because we're back here tomorrow again. You can do that. But at the same time, your preparation time is like 3 days, 5 days for the next match. You're always having to work ahead of yourself 2 or 3 weeks. And you probably need a bigger staff at club level, I think, because you just don't have the time. And if you don't have the time, you need to spread the workload wider. And
it takes a certain type of manager to be able to delegate like that, because some managers like keeping everything to themselves, and you've other managers that are great delegators? Are you kind of somewhere in between, or because you seem to kind of share the love a bit with the team?
Yeah, no, for me, I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not as good at. I've got a good understanding of pretty much every aspect of the game. But if you said to me to go and, like, my analyst, he's actually another Irish guy from Dublin. He Some of the stuff he does on player profiling, these like scatter graphs and outliers and all of this stuff, I wouldn't even know where to begin with it, how to create that sort of thing. I understand it when he shows it to me, but how to pull that data and that information so that we know, hey, this guy is playing more forward passes per quarter in a game than someone else, and the team we're about to play often leaves gaps centrally, so that player who is attempting those progressive passes is maybe a better option in this upcoming game. That level of detail and the sort of just that type of intelligence to do those type of things and present them in a way that a layperson like I can understand in simple terms. You have to give people their room to work. You have to give people their room to work, and then it all comes together. Sam Allardyce used to call it like his war room, where people come in and they present their sort of information, and together we come up with a solution to win the match. But also then my staff also understanding from me that sometimes they'll present me all the best information in the world, and I'll still go with the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'll still go with, do you know what? I know you're telling me, you're showing me all the reasons why Killian's the choice today. But you know what? There's something about him. I'm going to go with Conor today. And
Yes.
I've had staff in the past say to me, Coach, what are you doing? They've said to me, Coach, what are you doing? How can you, everything, all the information is telling us Killian, but you're saying Conor. And I'm going, because I feel the game. Football is both science and art.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling within the game that and this is where you build relationships as well, and you understand the game and you understand the person. And like, I even know in that situation, I've had that type of situation happen before. I remember putting a substitute on in a game many years ago, and every single one of my technical staff could not believe I was putting this player into the game because he'd had an awful week. It looked as though he had cement in his boots in training all week. He'd been purely awful. But I knew that what the game required and who he was in himself, the type of player he was when he was good, was the right player. And so what did I say to him? The last things I said to him as the subs board was about to go up was I said, have a look over your shoulder at the bench. And he looked over and I said, see every single one of those guys?
Oh,
he was like, yeah. I was like, all of them have said you should not play today. I was like, and I said, I don't have a reason to disagree with them, but I know who you can be. So go out and show who you are. And he ended up scoring and assisting in the last 15 minutes, and we won the game 3-2.
And you turned around and gave it to every single one of those technical staff.
It's not that thing. It's because I can't necessarily even explain it sometimes. It's just when you know people, and I spend a lot of time with my players and I talk to them a lot, and I try to get to know them about who they are, who their family are, what they're trying to be as a player. Maybe not who they are today as a player, but who do they see themselves when they picture the best version of themselves? And so using all that information, sometimes there's just that feeling, that you have that you've just got to go with. And look, it's not always going to be right, but if I've always said you're not always going to make the right decision, but if your decisions are made for the right reasons, then you'll be okay. You'll come out on top more often than not. And so yeah, it's, and you get to do that, I think, in club football a bit easier because you get to know the players at a much more deeper sort of personal level in club football, whereas international football, it's all done like this. It's great now because you've got Zoom, you've got Skype, you've got WhatsApp, FaceTime, all of these things. When I was with Sierra Leone, WhatsApp didn't exist.
Well,
what's
that's what
that?
I was gonna ask you on that with the communication side of things. Like, obviously, you've been to multiple nations across the globe, but as an English speaking person, like, how does that go? Because I think back to Trapattoni with Ireland, where it got a little bit troublesome with his inability to speak the local language. How have you found it going around the world?
I've generally found it okay. I've picked up little bits everywhere I've went. Thankfully, most of the countries I've went to, the level of spoken English tends to be okay. I would have to say in certain countries like Bangladesh, if we needed to do something more in depth and more detailed, it would need to get translated so that we get that level of detail. But on a sort of more basic level, the level of spoken English was okay. And so I think being in that position, had I been the national team coach in Bangladesh, it would have been more challenging because you're having to do things at a distance. The nations I've been national team coach with, the level of English has been very high
Right.
because Uganda, Gambia, and Sierra Leone are all English speaking nations. And then even Rwanda, post sort of the genocide again, the genocide era in Rwanda, they sort of moved away from French as an academic language and adopted English as an academic language. So even though it maybe wasn't as strong as the other
There was a
countries,
base there.
there was still a base there. Whereas, yeah, in Bangladesh, probably some of the more detailed conversations and presentations had to be done in Deshi, and that was, even all the presentations, we did dual language presentations, all the slides were done dual language, etc., to make sure the point got across.
And how have you found the Gambia? You're 2 games in, 1 win, one loss, and you have 2 pretty tough games coming up. How have you found settling in, and how have you found trying to learn up on all the players? I had a quick look at the team. Like, there is some recognizable names for football fans out there, like Musa Barrow, formerly of Atalanta. We have some players that are in Italy and England. I think there's an Ipswich player. Like, so there's a really good level of player there. How have you found kind of integrating with them?
Yeah, it's been really good so far, to be honest. I had a few options in terms of where I would go this summer. I had some options to go out to Asia as well, some club sides that were really interested, and I think lifestyle wise would have been easier because West Africa can be a bit chaotic at times. But when I sat down and looked at the squads and the players that we had available, the Gambia was the only option. I think our market value of the squad we named in June was around 50 to 60 million euros.
Well,
We were missing 11 players who'd competed at the previous AFCON through injury as well. A number of our players are very young, and so we expect, we got to the quarterfinals of the U20 World Cup last year, and a number of those players, we've got a 20-year-old who's the starting left back for CSKA Sofia. Adama Bojang, a young striker who was on Man United and Chelsea's radar, signed for Reims in France. Really talented young player. Obviously, Yankuba Minte has just signed for Brighton for £30 million. We've got a really young demographic of players who actually, I think if you come back in 3 years' time, the value of the Gambian team will be in excess of 100 million. And so the opportunity to work with those players and help guide them. And also, but the challenge with the Gambia is a really interesting one because you look at the AFCON back in January, and of a 27-man squad, only, I think, 4 of them were in their 30s.
wow.
So it's a really, actually 80% of the squad that went to AFCON are aged between 24 and 29. So they're all in their prime. And you look at them, even this week, we're in the middle of the summer, but this week I had like 8 guys all starting in the Europa Conference League, in the Champions League qualifiers, and the Europa League qualifiers. They are playing every week. They're playing, we've got a lad, he was on loan at Sampdoria last year. He's back at Roma now, and because De Rossi's now the head coach and had been his B team coach, Roma were playing their first pre-season game a few days ago, and Darbo, young 22, 23-year-old central midfielder, started for Roma in their first pre-season game. So, we have these players who are playing 20, 30, 40 games a season. I know the Irish managers, North and South, would like to have that, but often a lot of the guys being called up to wear green are on the subs bench. Whereas for me, we've got almost 200 players playing professionally around Europe. We've got 60 to 70 players playing in top tier leagues around Europe, and that's like Scandinavia, France, Italy, Spain, the Premier League in England. And so the quality is just really, really high. And so for me, it's now just about, putting the right guys on the pitch, really. And that's not an easy job because, like I said, we've got these young 20, 21-year-olds breaking through, doing so well. But in order for him to get in the squad, we've got to drop a 27-year-old who's playing 30 games a season, maybe in like the Swedish Premier League. So the choices are not easy. It's definitely the most talented and most competitive international squad I've ever had. And will no doubt upset a few people along the way because everyone has their favorites. Everyone has players they want to play. But for us, we're going to try and put a balanced team out there. And the really interesting challenge for us is the Gambia's success over the last 5 years has really been built on sort of a low block defensive counter-attack strategy, which was absolutely the right way to go, I think, because if you go back 5 years, the Gambia didn't know how to win. Whereas now they've been to 2 consecutive Cup of Nations. They know how to win. They've got that winning mentality. They know how to grind out results. But now if you look at the quality of attacking players that are breaking through, we need to flip the switch. We need to go and play more front foot football. We need to go and play more aggressive, pressing, attacking football. That's why the Federation asked me to come. And it's ultimately what the players want to do as well. So, yeah, can we keep winning? Can we introduce this young talent into the team? And can we flip the playing strategy from a defensive one to a more front foot attacking mentality? So, a nice, easy job for sure.
Yeah, a fantastic problem to have. And just before we let you go, I have to ask, because it'd be remiss of me not to. You were at one stage 66-1 for the Republic job. Is that something you would ever hope to do in the future? Come back to the island and take one of the national teams, or are you kind of happy enough going around the world and being the interesting story that I tell to everybody is a reason for why football is
too rainy
great
here from.
For me, look, I love going into new environments and new cultures, but it is always the secondary consideration. For me, for example, I said I had the opportunity to go back out to Asia this summer, but I chose the Gambia. Not because it was the Gambia, not because it was Asia, but because of the players and the opportunity. And do I think that what I bring, my personality, my approach, do I think that can help move the team forward? I always say football's a bit like cooking. It's about putting the right ingredients together. All ingredients have value, but if you put the wrong ingredients together, it just doesn't work. And if you put the right ingredients together, you can make some really spectacular dishes, Michelin star dishes. And so for me, I see myself as an ingredient. And is that going to work well in the environment? And are the other ingredients that I'm going to find there, are they, really appealing? And so for me, it's always about the football. And look, if the opportunity came to go back to Ireland at one point, with the Republic, with Northern Ireland, growing up, I'll not lie to you, I grew up going to Windsor Park, when I was young. I remember being there the night England lost 1-0 to Northern Ireland. I remember being there the night Northern Ireland beat Spain 3-2. And so, look, if you gave me both options on the table, Northern Ireland versus the Republic of Ireland as options, my heart would probably pull me to Belfast rather than Dublin.
Totally fair.
But at the same time, I'm a very much a proud Irishman. I grew up very thankfully in a household that just didn't want anything to do with a lot of the nonsense that goes on sometimes. And so for me, I always find it funny. Some of my friends where I grew up find it how passionate I am about the Irish rugby team. So for me, I'm a very proud Irishman, and I love being in Dublin. I love being in Belfast. It's been 20 years now since I lived at home. you're right about the temperature. I get the sense, being either Ireland or Northern Ireland's head coach, you probably wouldn't have to live in Ireland.
Well, it's an interesting one with that, and that's one that for me, it's that last question for me, because I know you've got games to prepare for, but a big talking point in the podcast for the last, I don't know, 200 now, however many days it took to get a manager, was the FAI's kind of pressing for having a manager living in the country. Like, what's your take on that as someone who is, 3-time international manager? Do you think it's necessary at all?
I think it depends on the profile of the team and what the federation want from the position. So this is my first time here. I'm sat in my house in Spain. I split my time sort of 60-40 between Europe and the Gambia. So the government in the Gambia provide me an apartment there, but they have no sort of necessity for me to be based there full time, because like I said, we've got close to 200 players playing professionally in Europe.
Yeah.
And so for me to be traveling to those games, even tomorrow, I'm going to go watch one of our players play here in Spain. We've got a few players breaking through in Spain here. When I want to jump on a train up to France, or, a low cost flight up to Scandinavia, being based here in Europe makes a lot more sense. And then for the other 40% of the year, I can be in the Gambia helping support the development of the Gambian League, because at the moment, we're not calling up players from the Gambian League. I think someone told me in the last sort of 6-7 years, only 1 or 2 players from the Gambian League have been called up to the national team, because the level is much more of a developmental league. And that's quite similar to the League of Ireland, to the Irish League in the North. There's not really many players get called up to the senior national team. Yes, to the 21s, to the 19s, but not the senior team. And so for the Gambia, it makes sense for me to be based in Europe. However, when I was Rwanda coach, 90% of our players were playing in the Rwandan Premier League. And so it made complete sense for me to live in Rwanda and to be scouting those players, to be working with the club coaches, etc. In Ireland, it's probably a little bit different, because the majority of players, north or south, are playing in England or Scotland. And so it's just a quick 30-40 minute flight to go across and watch the games every week. So it's not like you're traveling from Gambia to Sweden on a 6-hour flight. It's a little bit different. So
easier for their political decision to lead it.
So living in Dublin, just it makes it easy to hop across to England, etc. And then also you can be on the ground, you can be helping, directionally, in terms of, to give you an example, I was told this a few years ago. I was speaking to, who was the head coach at the time? I think the head coach of the under-21s for England was Stuart Pearce at the time. And Gareth had become England manager. And I met Stuart at a coaching event. And I asked him how much interaction does he have with Southgate, with Gareth. And he was like, we share an office.
Wow.
They literally had this at the time at St. George's Park. They didn't have separate offices. The 2 head coaches shared an office, and I was like, okay, that shows alignment. That's alignment, and so again, stuff like that's really important. So if a large proportion of the Irish under-21, under-19s team are coming through the League of Ireland and playing. And I think that's a great grounding as well. I think as an 18-year-old, you're much better to be playing 30 games a season for Bows or for Dundalk or for Shells than playing under 20 football in England. I think the maturity you get from that is huge. And then make your move over, if you're going to go across to England or Scotland after you've got 70 first team games in the League of Ireland or the Irish League. I think that's so. You look at players like, even in the North, the likes like Gareth McCauley, did that. Obviously, someone like James McLean, I think, did that in Ireland. And so I just think it develops you, it toughens you up. And so, I don't really see any huge reason why someone wouldn't live in Dublin. I think, and look, Dublin, it's not like, let's be honest, Dublin's probably a better place to live than most of the big cities in England. So
that's a big call.
it might not. It might be a bit more expensive than most of the big
Yeah.
cities in England, but Dublin's a good place to live. But I suppose if you've not been there or not lived there, it seems, I think especially if you're looking at some coaches who've maybe been in England for a long time, they can have a certain view of what Ireland is nowadays and what Dublin is nowadays, which maybe isn't so aligned to the reality.
Well, on that, Johnathan McKinstry, thank you so very much for taking the time to chat to us. It's been fantastic, and best of luck in the upcoming internationals. Hopefully we'll have you on again and get an update on how you're getting on in the Gambia, and let us know how your scouting of 200 players across Europe goes. And where can people find you if they want to keep up to date?
Oh, there's all that stuff on Google and stuff, isn't there? I think there's Twitter, there's, I don't know, Instagram. It's all like Coach McKinstry's a lot of the stuff. So, but yeah, in the modern day, it's the wonder of mobile phones. You're never more than a few clicks away from finding out what's happening in the world. So, and yeah, look, who knows? And who knows? Maybe one of these days. We came very close when I was Rwanda coach to having Northern Ireland v Rwanda as a friendly.
Oh, wow.
And that there wasn't quite enough time to get all the visas sorted. But that was close. And so who knows, maybe at some point down the line, Gambia versus Ireland or Gambia versus Northern Ireland in an international friendly, could be a possibility. Let's see.
Well, me and the boys will be there if so, I can tell you that much.
Build it and we will come.
I'll make sure I bring you a few Gambia shirts so you're supporting the right side.
Thanks very much, and we'll chat to you soon.
Okay, cheers.
Messi.